This tutorial is about the care and use of stereoscopes, which are our tools of the trade for photo interpretation. In this particular tutorial we'll be talking about care of stereos, setting up stereos and encouraging the use of stereos. Okay, so let's have a quick run through to summarise. Okay, so as you've seen this image before, if you've been following through the tutorials, these are expensive instruments, and that what you can see there is probably about $5,000 or $6,000 worth of optical equipment. It has specialised optics and specialised mirror arrangements, which I'll cover more about later. It has in this case, has a parallax bar. That little doohickey there costs about $1,500 to $2,000. So they're very specialist equipment. They're still very valid tools to evaluate historical imagery, and you can even use them quite adequately to evaluate printouts of digital imagery. So treat them carefully. The second most important thing is to keep them somewhere where their use is encouraged. They're not going to do anybody any good if they're tucked away in their storage box underneath a map table in some dusty corner of the office. So preferentially sit them up on a desktop. If you have an arm that enables them to be moved around rather than having to relocate the photos all the time, you can get a parallax arm, which means that the stereo can move around in the air above the photos without having to move the photos. That's a good idea. The arms are about $3,000 or $5,000 as well. I think they're not cheap, but they are a very good investment. Keep them somewhere where there's a light with an appropriate daylight coloured bulb in it, preferably close to a natural light window if possible, and something to throw over the top of them to keep the dust and stuff off them as well. Somewhere that it's very easy to get to and actually make use of them. Using them for the first time can be a bit difficult. This is the actual optical path. What the eye sees is reflected off a 45-degree mirror onto another 45-degree mirror and down onto the image, and basically it enables this eye to see this image, this eye to see this image, without having to strain your eyes to look at it off at an angle. So your eyes are essentially looking straight ahead, and the image path is bounced towards your eye, doing the job for you. In order to see the image properly, the images have to be aligned, that is up and down, left and right, rotated. They have to match up to each other. You have to have the focus correct for the images, and you have to have the oculars the right distance apart for your eyes to make sure that you're getting a good field of view. So, okay, 3 things to get right, otherwise it won't work, and if one of those 3 things is not right, you'll be straining. Another important issue to be aware of is the OH&S issues involved with using a stereoscope. You probably realise that it can be quite hard on your eyes, but there's a lot more to it than just that. If you have a look at this image, you'll see that this girl is not using magnifying oculars. She's actually just using the basic mirrors, and she has a 1.5 times magnification lens in place on the side. So she's seeing pretty much a full field of view at 1.5 times magnification. I don't think she's got the photos lined up correctly, but that aside, you can see how she's hunched over the photo, how sitting a stereo on a desk and using a normal chair, you can imagine being in this position all day using a stereo, what it would do to you. So it's not really a good position to be in. Other positions can be problematic as well. This is probably not the most ideal position to be in as well. And this is the diabolical movement. If you find yourself doing this head pushed forward compression of the rear of the cervical spine, the dorsal surface of the cervical spine, this can set up all sorts of strains through your neck and shoulders, which is headaches and neck aches and shoulder aches and all sorts of things. So this is the sort of motion you want to avoid at all costs. And it can be difficult because fitting a stereoscope into a workstation environment can be difficult. This is a setup that I used to use myself, where I had a desk which enabled me to put the stereo board up high, and even though it was up high and I didn't have to bend over to it, when the stereo moves away from you, you still have to crane your neck forward to a certain extent, so it can be very bad. Inclining the surface would probably help a bit, but then that would mean that the stereo would tend to fall forward. Having your data logger at the side is advantageous. Having a map on the other side in the old days you'd find that you'd be looking at the map, the stereo, the data logger, and back again. So your neck was doing a lot of work. So try to be aware of basic office principles with seating positions and such, and try to adhere to those as much as possible. I've got some more information on that in a moment. So also try to ensure that minimal misalignment exists between the photos for your eye health. The muscles in your eyes are the strongest muscles in your body. If you had muscles in your legs the same strength as the muscles in your eyes, you'd be able to jump about 50 feet in the air. But as strong as they are, they can still get strained. So be aware that at the end of the day, if you're getting headaches, you're probably having problems aligning your photos. And the more that your eyes get used to using a stereoscope, the more they will tend to adapt for you. So it's necessary to try and trick your eyes a bit to align the photo, look away at something in the distance, briefly look back, align the photo a bit more, look away into the distance, fix on a fixed point, look back to the photo quickly and align the photo a bit more. So just try little tricks like that to try and ensure that your photos are aligned as closely as possible, rotated correctly, left and right, up and down. And if you have scale variations across the photo, be aware that you'll need to move the photos frequently in order to minimise the effects of those scale variations. Okay. The standard office stretches that you see in a lot of places can help if you're using a stereo, particularly in neck and shoulder stretches and things like that. Even sitting for extended periods of time can be assisted by doing the sort of recommended stretches that you see around the place. If you're using stereos for hours on end, get up, go for a walk around the office every so often, walk outside, breathe some fresh air, do whatever you need to loosen yourself up, because you will benefit from it in the long run. Also, the situation that I described about using the stereo with this head pushed forward situation, slumped back, can be exacerbated by just normal computer use. So you tend to find that even when you're not using the stereoscope, you can be undoing any good work you do by stretching, by allowing your neck to get into this chin pushed forward situation. So try and bear in mind that when you're using your normal computer, find yourself in a position at the computer which is compatible with being able to do it for day in and day out. If the stereo is correctly focused, the oculars are correctly aligned, the photos are set up properly, and you take care of your ergonomics, long-term risk is fairly minimal. Many of us have been using stereos for 20 years or more and can readily cope with the strains. If you find you're starting to get some issues, then reassess your position and have a bit of a break away from it if you can. With the advent of digital systems where the stereoscopic view is on your normal computer, the sorts of situations you find yourself in where the neck stretching forward situation arises with the use of a stereoscope will probably occur less and less, which is a big plus. Okay, let's move on. Once they're set up, the value of being able to see the landscape in 3D can't be underestimated. It really does add a whole new dimension, literally, to your ability to interpret aerial photographs. I've personally seen people interpret patches of thistles on top of a hill in 2D as being a low-lying wet area. So you can eliminate all those sorts of issues if you use 3D interpretation. Let's talk about care of stereos briefly. As I said, they're hugely expensive bits of gear. I don't know about you, but I call $50,000 to $50,000 pretty expensive. The dual lens APT2 Leica stereoscopes, you won't get much change out of $50,000. Your standard Topcon stereoscopes that you saw in the previous image are probably $5,000 or more, so they're well worth looking after. If they're not going to be used for extended periods, make sure you store them away in the box. Better still, put them aside somewhere where they're set up ready to go with a cover over them, but for long-term storage, the best place for them is in their box. Lenses and mirrors, these are a special case. Lenses are usually fairly well coated with protective surfaces and things, but the mirrors on stereoscopes are really important to look after, and the reason is that they're what's called first surface mirrors. Now, first surface mirrors are a situation where in a normal light path of the mirror you'll see a light beam coming in, it's refracted by the glass, bounces off the mirror surface at the rear of the mirror, is refracted on the way out again. So you see essentially a double image. With the first surface mirror, the coating is on the front surface of the mirror, so it's an identical reflection, angle of incidence, angle reflection, no diffraction through the actual glass, and so you get a much clearer image. With a reflective surface on the front of the mirror, anything can damage it, including acid out of your skin, so fingerprints on the mirror are a bad idea. Any damage to the mirror is to the mirror itself, not to a glass surface in front of it. So at all costs, don't touch the mirrors on a stereoscope. Grip it by the sides of the frame of the stereoscope, or the handles that are on it, or even the legs that are folded up out of the way if you're using an arm over to hover over the top of the photos. But don't touch the first surface mirrors. If they are filthy or marked up, use appropriate lens cleaning fluids, tissues, soft cloth, that sort of process to clean them, because they are, once damaged, they're irreplaceable, or unable to be repaired. You'll have to replace them at fairly high cost. And make sure that if you are trying to teach somebody to use a stereoscope, that you instill this sense of care of the first surface mirrors, because without them the stereoscope is greatly diminished and the use of it is very much impaired. Eyepiece cleaning gear comes with each stereoscope, so you should make sure that that's kept up to date in the box. If necessary, replace the brushes and clean cloths and things like that if they go walkabout, which they have a habit to do, and make sure that the cleaning gear is kept up to date. Don't overwind the binocular units on the top. We recommend when first starting to use a stereoscope that you wind the binoculars all the way to the top of their travel gently, and then wind them down until they do the focusing for you. If you wear glasses, it's a good idea to keep wearing the glasses while you're using the stereoscope. It'll mean that your eye doesn't get quite as close to the stereo and you have a slightly restricted field of view, but it will mean that you don't have to continually take your glasses on and off to look at other resources like maps and computer screens and such. And it will, any corrections for things like astigmatism and such, will make sure that there's no distortions in the photo themselves that you're perceiving. And if you wind the binocular units down from the top, it'll mean that the binocular is doing all the focusing for you, and gradually as the image comes into focus, the binocular will slow down in rotation and it'll be doing the focusing. Whereas if you wind it up from the bottom, your eye will tend to focus and take some of the focusing load instead of the binocular. Bear in mind that resting your eyes on the binoculars or your glasses will tend to force them downwards, and they will tend to need to be wound up a little bit from time to time, because they tend, the helical spiral on the focusing system is very well greased and will tend to move down with time. So bear in mind that you will have to adjust your focusing from time to time. Don't lose the box or the attachments, particularly the parallax bar, because they're very expensive if there's actually one in the box. Use the correct materials to clean the lenses. Keep the hands well clear of the mirrors. These are the typical points that we find on stereoscopes that have been used by people that aren't used to them. These are the things that get damaged or result in a diminished use of the stereoscope. Setting them up is, for the first time user, quite difficult. Some people take it up much more easily than others, and some people have a great deal of difficulty. Once they get used to it and get used to the fact that there's three major things that have to be working in concert to work properly, it gets easier. But for the first time user, it can be difficult. And as I said in the previous session, it's quite often not the person's inability to perceive information stereoscopically, it's their inability to use the technology of the stereoscope that prevents them from being able to see the imagery in 3D. It's not easy to quickly come to terms with the use of stereo. You have to align oculars, photos and focus to get a 3D image, and each one of those, if one of them's out, then you won't be able to see it properly. Okay. Now, course notes for the API courses contain a good summary on how to set up a stereo. I've included it here to enable you to pause this playback to give you a process that you can follow. if you need to come back to this, pause it, have it on screen while you're running through the process, and you'll be able to set it up quite easily. This is pretty straightforward, and I'd be surprised if you have any major difficulties in learning to use a stereo using this as a guide. As I said briefly, encourage the use of a stereo, set it up in a viable location, make it easy to use, give it good natural light, have a lamp with a 6000 Kelvin or pure white light to avoid any colour casts on the photos, and something that will take place more and more is the stereoscopic use in the digital world. If you have a planar unit like this, or you have an ability to use the information digitally, then there'll be less use for stereoscopes, and most of your interpretation will be done on a computer screen, and maps will be able to be brought in digitally rather than having a lot of map space around you required on the desk. So as time progresses, you'll find that technology will change and different things will apply, but in the long run, always be careful of your OH&S issues, because you're a bit harder to replace than stereos. Okay, that's the end of this particular session. Okay, in previous sessions we've talked about stereoscopic vision and how it's an inherent trait of the individual, and how we see in 3D and how different perspective in space is required for each eye to be able to view in 3D. Part of the API course, before we enter into any exercises and setting up and using the stereoscope, is a brief discussion of testing stereoscopic vision. Let's move on, and to refresh a little bit about stereo perception. You remember that human beings with forward-facing eyes have a large area of 3D overlap, and each eye allows you to see a wide field of view. This area being 3D, this area being just visible from one eye. Different animals have different arrangements, prey animals and predator animals and that sort of thing. So it gives us certain advantages in terms of our ability to judge depth over a wide field of view, which is very handy if you're swinging through the trees and such. As I've mentioned, prey animals have wide fields of view. I'm not so sure about the ability to see directly behind them, but anyway, you get the idea. Yes, people have a range of different abilities to perceive stereoscopically, hence the reason for stereo testing. Okay. Now, with stereo testing, there's a range of different ways that you can test stereoscopic perception. To do our sort of work, it's pretty important that you have decent stereoscopic perception, and using a stereoscope is an easy way for your eyes to be able to view the information on two widely spaced photographs at a magnified level of view, because, as you probably appreciate, when you're looking at an object in front of you, your eyes generally tend to converge on that image, and to diverge is quite difficult. Even to see parallel is quite difficult. You might remember, if you've been through the tutorials, that there was a stereo pair of a volcanic cone I showed you some time ago. You can actually see that in 3D if you can force your eyes to see parallel, but many of you won't be able to do that without some training. So a stereoscope makes that easier, but you still need the ability to perceive in 3D, which, as I said, is done by the brain, and so a stereoscope is only a facilitator, not the actual thing that makes it possible to see 3D. Okay. The first test that we give you during the course of an API course is an optometric test, which is this little beastie here. It actually is designed for optometrists to use, primarily for stereo testing of children, hence the fact that it's got a big fly and farmyard animals and things like that in it. But it also contains a series of increasing difficulty tests, series of tests of increasing difficulty with circles, and one of the circles in each block of circles is floating higher out of the page than the other three, and 1 is quite easy, 9 is quite hard. This test has been given to all the people that have been to the API testing that we've done in the last year or two, and only one person failed to get 100%, which gives you a good idea that the person does have good stereo vision. Once they start using the stereoscope, if they have difficulties, it's probably because of the simple technology of the stereoscope, the fact that the oculars are not focused, or the eyepieces are too wide apart, or the photos are incorrectly aligned. Once you know that they have good stereoscopic perception, then to go onto the stereoscope is made a lot easier, because you know that if you get it right, they'll be able to see 3D. Not that they don't have stereoscopic perception as a starting point. Another standard test that's been used over the years is called the Zeiss test, the Zeiss Pulfric test, which is where you use a just a moment. Now, where was I? The Zeiss test. The Zeiss test has been used quite a lot. Generally used with a pocket stereoscope, and it consists of two practically identical fields of view and a range of tabulated descriptions of what's in the field of view. For example, ring 1, which is this one here on both images, has a square in it, a marginal ring, a triangle and a point, and you're asked to describe the order in which they either go down into or come up out of the page. So, you know, if the point is furthest away, you know, you'll mark point as being 1 and 2, 3, 4 and so on. The good thing about the Zeiss Pulfric test is that it can't be, you can't cheat on it. If you can't see what it's showing you, then you can't see it. Simple as that. Which can be a problem in the next test we talk about, which also has its own separate merits. But the Zeiss Pulfric test is a good test of stereo vision and has been used over an extended period of time. Next test we're going to talk about is the Graham-Baker test. I'll just quickly cover. I think I've got an enlarged copy. Yep, there's an enlarged copy of the Zeiss test. In fact, for those of you that can focus independently, you can be able to get these two rings into a stereoscopic image in the middle, and you'll be able to see the three-dimensionality of the internal contents. But as I said, you have an answer sheet down here based upon the test above it. Okay, going back to where we were. Graham-Baker test. Now, the Graham-Baker test was developed by two people, Graham and Baker, strangely enough, in I think the Forestry Commission originally, and consists of two black and white photos, a stereo pair, on which are marked a series of points and lines. And you'll see that when you look at the actual images, you'll see that the points are labelled like P and P1 or N and N1, and the lines are labelled things like Q and Q1 or B and B1 or D and D1. And the task is to enter onto the answer sheet which of the points, in this case the first point is J and J1, which is up here, J and J1, which one is on higher ground. So you look at the ground underneath the points, and whichever ground is higher, you annotate, put a ring around whichever one you think's higher, and so on through all the dots, the points, and through all the lines. And for the lines, you look at the land underneath the line and say which land has the steepest slope. The land under the line, so for example D and D1, is the land under D1 steeper than D? If it is, you put a ring around D1, and so on. Okay, so it's a test of your ability to perceive, which also includes a test of your ability to use the stereoscope. However, the difficulties are that it tends to be influenced by your knowledge of the landscape. If you know, for example, that this is a watercourse, then you're pretty aware that that's a fairly low part of the landscape, and that things like this coming down towards it are likely to be going downslope into the drainage line, and so it can tend to be able to be manipulated by someone with a good knowledge of the landscape. However, as I said, it is a test of interpretation using the stereoscope, so you have to be able to use the stereoscope. It does test your stereo perception. It's a departmental standard which has been used for many years, and if necessary, once a person has done a Graham-Baker test using these photos, we've developed a range of other tests which test their ability to interpret what they're seeing in the imagery that can be based on these same photos. Okay, let's go back to where we were. So that basically summarises the stereo test that we give during the course of an API course. A good simple test of stereoscopic perception is the optometric test. A good test of ability to use the stereoscope is the Graham-Baker test. And given your ability to base other assessments on the same stereo pair without having to have a student change photos or anything like that, it has other advantages as well. Anyhow, that's basically what we need to know about testing stereoscopic vision.